Section 7. The Use of Medicinal Agencies.
Introduction. Shortly after the organization of the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists in May 1863, at a time when the church numbered 3,500 members, Ellen G. White received a vision calling the attention of Adventists to the importance of good health and the close relationship between physical well-being and spiritual experience. The light given touched a number of important phases of living, including diet, value of fresh air, the use of water, healthful attire, exercise, rest, etc. Prominent in this important revelation of June 6, 1863, was light concerning the harmful effects of the poisonous drugs that physicians so freely prescribed. In the subsequent years, the great basic health reform vision was followed by many visions opening up in more detail the principles and the application of principles that should guide in matters of retaining good health and the care of the sick, the call for medical institutions, and the manner in which Seventh-day Adventists should conduct such institutions. On these matters, Mrs. White wrote much. Her first comprehensive presentation appeared in 1864 in Spiritual Gifts, Volume 4, pages 120 to 151, in an article entitled Health. Mrs. White then expanded this 30-page statement into 6 separate articles for publication under the general title of Diseases and Its Causes. In 1865, these were embodied in the 6 numbered pamphlets compiled by Elder and Mrs. White, entitled Health, or How to Live, one E.G. White article appearing in each number. From time to time over the next several decades, the various journals of the denomination carried articles by Mrs. White on the subject of health. In 1890, she presented a comprehensive picture of the health message in her first half of the book, Christian Temperance and Bible Hygiene. In 1905, she published The Ministry of Healing, her climaxing volume on the subject. This she intended for very wide distribution in America and overseas. In each of her general presentations on health, Mrs. White discussed poisonous drugs and their use in the treatment of the sick. This phase of the subject, prominent in the original health reform vision, filled 8 of the 30 pages of her initial Spiritual Gifts presentation. She devoted one entire article in The Disease and Its Causes series to the subject of drugs. Nor was Ellen White's voice alone at the time. There were certain physicians on both sides of the Atlantic who deplored the absence of adequate diagnosis and gravely questioned the use of many commonly prescribed poisonous drugs. As a result, gradual change took place in the treatment of the sick as regards the use of drugs. These changes have been most rapid and striking in the years following the first decade of the 20th century, when modern medical education, along with scientific and experimental lines, developed. In her earlier writings particularly, Mrs. White made singularly strong statements concerning the physicians of the time and concerning the use of drugs. In order rightly to evaluate these, we must know something of the medical practices at the time the statements were made. Such a knowledge can be gained by examining the medical literature of those times and from reading the currently available Story of Our Health Message by D.E. Robinson, pages 13 to 27. In her books that deal specifically with the problems and work of the Church and its members, Mrs. White devotes more space to the subject of health and the care of the sick than to any other one single topic. These counsels are spread before the general public in more than 2,000 pages of the Ministry of Healing, Medical Ministry, counsels on diet and food, counsels on health and temperance, and in articles in the Testimonies for the Church. The reader is directed to these sources for the full balanced picture of the health reform message. There have been assembled in this volume 4 chapters composed of statements drawn from various sources, some published and some unpublished, written mostly to medical personnel in connection with our institutions, which illustrate the way Mrs. White herself applied the principles revealed to her in vision. In her various utterances on the subject of the care of the sick, she ever held before us the ideal for which we should strive. At the same time, she recognized, as seen by the terminology used, that there were times and circumstances in special situations when it was justifiable and necessary to employ medications, even those known to be poisonous. It is significant that Ellen White gives us the assurance that Christ and the angels are present in the operating room, attending and guiding the consecrated Christian physician and performing surgical operations. Before major surgery, the entire body is saturated with a powerful and, in a sense, harmful drug to the point of complete unconsciousness and to complete insensibility. By the same token, after surgical procedures, the physician may find it necessary to administer sedatives that almost certainly includes drugs to give relief and prevent the patient from lapsing from sheer pain into a state of surgical shock and, in some instances, possible death. As they strive to know and follow God's will, not a few today are making inquiries similar to the one expressed in the words of a medical student who in 1893 wrote to Mrs. White to ask her about the use of drugs. In his letter he said, "From our study of the testimonies and the little work, How to Live, we can see that the Lord is strongly opposed to the use of drugs in our medical work. Several of the students are in doubt as to the meaning of the word drug as mentioned in How to Live. Does it refer only to the stronger medicines as mercury, strychnine, arsenic, and such poisons, the things we medical students call drugs, or does it also include the simpler remedies as potassium, iodine, squills, etc.? We know that our success will be proportionate to our adherence to God's method. For this reason, I have asked the above question." The first item in Chapter 28, which follows immediately, is Mrs. White's reply to the inquiry of that medical student. The White Trustees.